Designing an SCCM infrastructure involves planning out your site hierarchy and determining which site roles you'll need to install in the site servers in that hierarchy in order to support your requirements. In this nugget, we're going to cover a good majority of the server and site system roles, and we'll also take a look at all the players involved in a site hierarchy, such as primary sites, secondary sites, and central administration sites. Let's start at the top here with site system servers. These are otherwise known as the required roles for SCCM to function, and they're more labels than anything else. Whenever we install a primary site or install an optional role on a machine within our site, they will automatically acquire one of these labels. For example, whenever you install an optional SCCM role onto a machine in your hierarchy, we'll look at those optional roles in a second, that machine becomes a site system server. Whenever you run Configuration Manager setup on a machine to install a primary site, that machine becomes a site server. Any machine containing the SMS executive service, which by the way is the host process for which all other SCCM components run under, is known as a component server. The machine running an instance of SQL Server that will host our site database is known as the site database server. And finally, we have the SMS provider, which is a machine that hosts this component to facilitate communication between the Configuration Manager console and the site database. Next up, we have site system roles, otherwise known as optional roles, and these are the components that will provide us with all of the features and functionality that we're looking to support in our SCCM infrastructure. The first two here, management points and distribution points, are arguably the most important as they provide the core functionality that we all know and love in SCCM, and they're also installed by default whenever you install a primary site. Management points provide clients with policy and service location information, and our clients also use management points to upload their configuration information to the site database. Distribution points are used to store and deliver content to client devices, and that content can be anything from application packages to operating system images. So these are the two site system roles that you'll want at a bare minimum to support the core features of SCCM. And you may want more than one of these in your environment to spread the load across your hierarchy. And that's all going to depend on the size of your network and the shape of your hierarchy. More on that down the road. We can further extend the functionality of our SCCM infrastructure by installing additional system roles onto a machine or machines in our hierarchy. So for example, if you want to provide updates to your users and their devices, you'll need to install a software update point and also configure it to use Windows Server Update services. If you want to create and manage reports, you'll need to install a reporting services point somewhere within your hierarchy and configure it to use an instance of SQL Server reporting services. And by the way, this is not a complete list of all the site system roles, although these are the ones that are covered in 70-703. So we're going to look at all of these individually, have a chance to play with them, and cover a couple of them that aren't on this list as well. So we'll save the rest of these for when we get there. Moving on, let's talk about site hierarchies. There are three kinds of sites that we can implement within a hierarchy. First up is the only required one, and that's a primary site. So you'll need at least one of these within your hierarchy, and it's used to support clients. Secondary sites are installed as children of primary sites. These secondary sites are used to extend the reach of your primary site to manage devices in locations that have a slow or latent network connection between the secondary site and your primary site. And you also need a local instance of SQL Server installed on these secondary site servers as they host a subset of the primary site's database used to reduce the amount of replication across those slow network links. The last piece of the puzzle here is a central administration site, which when installed sits at the very top of your hierarchy and is used to centrally administer, manage, and report on your primary sites. So a central administration site has no capability to manage users or devices. It's purely there to consolidate everything that happens at the primary sites, which become children of that central administration site. Now, how you design your SCCM infrastructure will depend on a couple of factors. The first and biggest one is the geographical makeup of your network. If you have a global infrastructure and IT teams at each location that want to manage their own slice of the pie, then you can install primary sites at each location with a central administration site at HQ. This will give IT teams in those locations complete control over their portion of the infrastructure. On the flip side, if you didn't want to give them control, you could just install a primary site at HQ and get away with secondary sites at all of those remote locations. Another factor you'll need to take into consideration are scalability limits. Every component in SCCM has a scalability limit, sites as well as site system roles, and they are set pretty high, but if you're dealing with hundreds of thousands to millions of devices, you may need more sites or more site system roles to support that load. Thankfully, that's not going to be something we need to worry about here in our lab environment, as we are going to start here with a very simple hierarchy. We're going to bring up a single primary site, also known as a standalone site on a machine, which is going to contain all of the required server roles, including the site database server, and then we're going to install our optional roles onto this single machine as well, a management point and a distribution point. So at least to begin with, we're going to put everything on one machine, which is totally okay, even for small to medium-sized real-world implementations. And those are the basics of designing an SCCM infrastructure. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.